Lieutenant Kitai's sensory fronds snapped taut against his spine. The silence had broken. For 3 hours, the Vera system had been a graveyard. Broken hulls tumbling past the viewport in lazy arcs, their impact scars catching the distant glow of the fractured moon. Debris pattered against the Radiant Accord's defensive screens like insect wings. Radiation storms flickered across the void like distant lightning, silent and indifferent. The Coalition Armada held position at the system's edge, engines idling low, every ship quiet, every sensor listening. After 3 cycles of fighting the Vrak's dominion here, they had learned one thing. Silence meant survival. Then the void began to pulse. At first it registered as a minor anomaly on the long-range array, repeating fluctuations, irregular but rhythmic. Kitai extended his sensory fronds and refined the signal, filtering out interference, stripping away background radiation. The tactical chamber of the flagship Radiant Accord filled with the translated output. Sound. Low. Distorted. It crawled through the space like something alive, layered with sharp beats that made Kitai's mandibles clench, rising tones that left his fronds vibrating after they faded. It repeated every 92 seconds. Not encryption, not telemetry, not any identification format used by the Coalition. It was noise. And yet, the rhythm caught, held, released, then caught again. A Valori technician beside him shuddered, chitin plates rattling softly. The Thren communications officer sealed both auditory membranes, releasing a faint chemical trace of distress into the air recyclers. Kitai forced his fronds to still before speaking. Source located. Single vessel. Outer debris boundary. Minimal power output. No active maneuvering. The words came out clipped, professional, the only armor left. The projection shifted. The ship was small compared to the warships surrounding it. Its hull was scorched and pitted, one engine assembly torn open, internal structures exposed to vacuum. It drifted slowly, turning end over end like wreckage that had not yet accepted it was dead. But the signal continued. Steady, persistent, alive. Magnify, Admiral Soren ordered. The image sharpened. External antenna arrays had been extended manually, their surfaces blackened by heat damage, edges warped from prolonged operation. One of them glowed faintly, continuous use bleeding thermal energy into the void. Whoever was aboard was choosing to transmit. That fact lodged in Kitai's mind like a splinter. In a war zone, with Vrak's patrols still active, transmission was not protocol. Transmission was not survival. Transmission was. The rhythm climbed again. Identify the signal type, the Admiral said. Kitai pushed the filters further, stripping distortion, isolating frequencies. The chamber filled with clearer sound, layered percussion, irregular harmonics, something like multiple voices buried beneath the noise. Not language, not code, emotion. The words surfaced unbidden. Not tactical data, not threat assessment. Emotion, raw, unstructured, bleeding through the distortion like a wound that wouldn't close. Around the chamber, species-specific stress responses bloomed. A crystalline delegate's facets flickered irregularly. The gaseous Halori representative contracted to half its normal volume. Even Admiral Soren's crest had darkened half a shade. Kitai's console pinged. Cross-species stress indicators, rising. Is it a neurological weapon? Asked the Thren commander, membranes still sealed tight, voice thin through translation. No direct cognitive interference detected, Kitai replied. However, cross-species stress response is increasing. Attention instability. Elevated heart rates. The rhythm climbed, dropped, climbed again. It felt purposeful, not ordered, not efficient, not anything the tactical manuals had prepared them for. Uncontrolled. Possibility. Vrak's psychological warfare, another officer said. Unstructured sensory pattern to degrade focus in mixed crews. Admiral Soren's crest darkened to full threat coloration. Raised defensive screens. Fleet to combat readiness. No outgoing transmissions. Across the tactical display, Coalition vessels brightened as shields activated. Weapon systems rotated toward the drifting ship. Point defenses came online. Carrier bays sealed. Still, the sound continued. Kitai studied the hull markings now visible along the vessel's flank. Most had been scorched away, but a partial identification band remained near the forward section. Letters, not numerals, arranged in a pattern that meant nothing to him. He enlarged the fragment and routed it to the analysis station behind him. A junior analyst leaned forward, her hands moving quickly across the interface. The chamber filled with the faint scent of concentration pheromones. Seconds stretched. The rhythm repeated. Again. Hitai watched the analyst's 4 hands move across the interface, each motion slower than the last. The scent of concentration pheromones thickened. Identification match, the analyst said. The room stilled. Origin classification? The analyst's voice dropped. The word came out like it might burn. Unknown species designation. Human. Silence fell so completely that even the recycled air seemed to pause. Hitai had seen the after-action reports. A single colony world. No fleet support. No reinforcements coming. The Vraks had demanded surrender. Standard procedure. Efficient. Expected. The humans had answered with open-channel laughter. The defense had lasted 6 weeks beyond any rational projection. Official status. Presumed extinct. The distorted rhythm filled the chamber again, louder now in the absence of voices. A ghost signal. Or something that had refused to die. Admiral Soren spoke quietly. Confirm life signs. Hitai turned back to his console, extending the sensor array toward the drifting vessel. The readings began to resolve, and what he saw made every frond on his body lock rigid as the music played on. The music was starting to crack at the edges again. Captain Elena Marquez tapped the side of the console with the heel of her hand, not hard enough to break anything, just enough to remind the ancient circuitry that someone was still here. Her father had done that, she remembered suddenly. Tapped the dashboard of their old ground car when it coughed during winter starts. The memory surfaced unbidden, sharp and unexpected. The speakers above her head popped, hissed, and then the rhythm settled back into something almost clean. Drums first, then guitar, then a voice shouting words in a language half the galaxy couldn't pronounce. English. Her mother's voice, singing along in the kitchen, years ago. Good enough. She leaned back in the command chair. The leather was cracked now, shedding flakes onto her uniform, and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound fill the bridge. The ship smelled like warm metal, burnt insulation, and recycled air that had been through the filters too many times. The emergency lights painted everything in dull amber. Half the displays were dark. The navigation console still had a handwritten note taped to it. Don't touch this, or we all die, Singh. Singh had handwritten that note 3 months ago, during the first week of the Vraks offensive. He'd been calibrating the jump drive when the second wave hit. The note was still there. Singh wasn't. Most of them weren't. Elena opened her eyes and checked the broadcast timer. 87 seconds left in the current loop. When it hit 0, the system would automatically switch to the next file in the rotation. Music, then a crew message, then silence for 10 seconds, then repeat. She reached forward and keyed the manual override anyway. Old habit. Trust the machine, but verify. Her fingers left smudges on the screen. She hadn't washed properly in days. Water was for drinking, not cleaning. If you're hearing this, she said into the mic, voice steady despite the dryness in her throat. This is Captain Elena Marquez, Colonial Defense Vessel Santa Lucia. We are operational, partially damaged, and holding position in Vera outer orbit. She hesitated, listening to the faint hum of the failing life support. Somewhere aft, a pump cycled unevenly. The sound had been there for 2 weeks. She'd stopped noticing until moments like this, when silence threatened. We're still here, she added, softer. And you're not alone. She released the key. The recording slotted itself into the queue between a crew message and a music file. The galaxy might be empty, but the silence didn't get to decide that. For 8 hours, they'd followed doctrine. 8 hours of drifting through wreckage with every system on minimum. 8 hours of watching the long-range scanners stay empty. 8 hours of nothing but ventilation fans and the distant creaks of a damaged hull cooling in vacuum. Elena had walked the corridors that first night, checking on her people. She'd found Chun in engineering, staring at a wall. Found Haddad in the galley, stirring cold protein paste in the dark. Found the medic's quarters sealed, soft sounds coming through the door that she pretended not to hear. By hour 6, 2 crew members had fought in the corridor outside berthing. By hour 7, someone was crying in the head and trying to hide it. At hour 8, Sullivan appeared in the bridge doorway. Permission to try something stupid. Elena looked up from damage reports that hadn't changed in 3 hours. Define stupid. Sullivan held up a data slate. Open channel broadcast. Low power. Wideband. She stared at him. That's not stupid, she said slowly. That's suicidal. He shrugged. Maybe. But right now everyone thinks we're already dead. Elena leaned back. The chair creaked. Somewhere in the ship, a voice raised in anger, then fell silent. What would we broadcast? Sullivan smiled. It was the first smile she'd seen in days. Home. The first transmission had been quiet. Just a simple identifier and a short status update. No response. The scanners stayed empty. But in the galley that night, someone laughed at something. Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd heard laughter. The second transmission included a recording from Corporal Davis. A joke her brother had sent before the jump lanes closed. Something about gravity and cats. It wasn't funny. Not really. But when it played over the ship-wide channel, Elena heard someone in engineering snort. Then someone else. Then half a dozen people, chuckling at a joke that made no sense in vacuum. Still no response from outside. The third transmission included music. Elena had chosen it herself, an old recording, something her mother used to play. When the first notes echoed through the corridors, she'd braced for complaints, for dismissals. Instead, people started moving. From berthing, from engineering, from the darkened common areas. They drifted toward the source, pulled by something Elena couldn't name. By the second verse, someone was singing along. By the chorus, half a dozen voices had joined. The medic who hadn't spoken in 2 days laughed when it ended. The ship didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, alive. So they kept going. Every crew member recorded something. Messages to family. Stories. Bad jokes. Recipes. One engineer gave a 20-minute lecture about the proper way to make coffee in microgravity. Another recorded a lullaby she used to sing to her daughter. They played the messages on internal rotation. Then Sullivan had the idea that made Elena pause. Let's send it out, he said. That's a lot of emotional noise, she replied. Exactly. She understood immediately. The Vraks relied on predictability. Silence. Efficiency. Clean tactical signals. No one planned for a damaged ship drifting in open space, broadcasting laughter and music and terrible jokes into the void. Do it, she said. Then Sullivan died. It happened during a hull breach in Sector 7. Fast. Too fast for anyone to reach him. Elena had been on the bridge when the alarm sounded, and by the time she reached the sealed section, the monitors showed no life signs. She'd stood there for a long time, hand pressed to the bulkhead, breathing recycled air that tasted like nothing. That night, she found his final recording in the broadcast queue. He'd added it himself, 3 days earlier, without telling anyone. If you're hearing this, his voice said, warm and tired and very human, then either you found us, or you're stuck out here too. A brief pause. A quiet breath. Either way, you're not alone. Elena had listened to it once. Then she'd added it to the permanent rotation. Some things didn't get to die. Now, weeks later, Elena sat alone on the bridge while the rotation played. A child's voice came through the speakers next. Hi, Mama. Uncle Sullivan says this might reach you someday. I lost my front tooth. The recording crackled. Sullivan had added a soft instrumental track underneath it. Elena swallowed. You don't turn it off, she reminded herself. You don't let the ship go quiet. Because the silence comes back fast. She stood and walked the length of the bridge, past empty stations, past chairs that still had personal items tucked into their frames. A photo. A lucky coin. A strip of colored tape marking someone's preferred control layout. Captain. Engineering's voice came through the intercom. Weak, but still there. Go ahead. Broadcast antenna 2 is overheating again. Can you cycle it? Already did. We're running them harder than they were designed for. Elena looked at the power allocation display. The broadcast system was drawing more energy than the secondary life support. She didn't hesitate. Keep it running, she said. There was a pause. Copy that, engineering replied. Because everyone understood. The broadcast wasn't a distress call anymore. It was a statement. We're here. We didn't vanish. We're still fighting. The next audio file clicked into place. Sullivan's voice filled the bridge again. If you're hearing this, then either you found us, or you're stuck out here too. A pause. Either way, you're not alone. The phrase had become the anchor of the entire rotation. Every cycle ended with it. Every new recording included some variation. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't efficient. It was necessary. Because if someone, somewhere, heard it, then the galaxy wasn't empty. And if no one heard it, then at least the crew of the Santa Lucia would hear it. Elena returned to the command chair and watched the stars drift slowly across the damaged viewport. She knew what Coalition doctrine would say. Excessive transmission increases detection risk. Emotional expression reduces operational efficiency. Personal identity compromises command structure. She could almost hear an alien officer asking the question, "Why would you announce your position while under threat?" The answer was simple. Because fear thrives in darkness. Because isolation breaks people faster than enemy fire. Because sometimes survival isn't about hiding. Sometimes survival is about refusing to disappear. The broadcast timer hit 0. The music started again. This time it was louder. Someone in engineering had boosted the output. Elena allowed herself a small smile. Out there, somewhere, the signal was moving. Crossing debris fields. Sliding past dead satellites. Traveling through the cold emptiness toward anyone still listening. Maybe the Coalition would hear it. Maybe the Vrax would. Maybe no one would. But the signal would keep going. Because humans didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with stubbornness. With memory. With noise. With the simple, defiant belief that if you kept talking long enough, someone would answer. Elena keyed the mic one more time and added a new line to the rotation. "This is the Santa Lucia," she said. "We're holding position in Vera. Systems damaged, crew reduced, but operational." She looked out at the endless dark. "We're still here," she said. Then, after a moment, "And if you hear us," she let the words come out softer this time. "You're not alone." The doctrine chamber of the Coalition did not allow sound unless it was necessary. It was a vast sphere of muted light, suspended within the central hull of the diplomatic carrier Concordance Prime. Representatives from 27 species occupied their assigned positions in concentric tiers, each station individually calibrated for atmospheric pressure, gravity tolerance, and sensory input. Chemical buffers neutralized stray pheromones. Acoustic dampeners absorbed vibrations before they could propagate. Even the illumination adjusted itself automatically, filtering out color spectrums known to trigger emotional responses. War, the Coalition believed, demanded clarity. Clarity required silence. No one had ever questioned this. At the center of the chamber, a single projection floated, the damaged human vessel, rotating slowly against the black of the Vera system. Beneath it, a waveform pulsed, irregular, layered, persistent. The signal. And despite every dampener in the room, everyone could feel it. Chair Moderator Velis of the Karth Union extended 3 slender limbs toward the control field. "Proceed with playback, controlled amplitude." A technician complied. Sound filled the chamber. Not language. Not code. A chaotic structure of rhythm and rising tones, layered with something that might have been voices buried deep in the distortion. Several delegates activated personal dampening fields within seconds. The Hellori Collective representative visibly contracted, its cloud form tightening around its core nucleus like a fist closing. Velis let it play for 12 full seconds before terminating the audio. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Heavier. Charged. Emotional response indicators. A data band illuminated around the chamber. Elevated stress in 21 species. Attention disruption in 14. Minor cognitive drift in 7. Velis folded its limbs slowly. Assessment. Non-standard transmission with measurable psychological impact. General Terex of the Thren Defense Cohort spoke next, voice flattened through translation. Recommendation. Classify as potential hostile influence. Human origin does not reduce threat probability. A low ripple of agreement passed through several stations. The Drawl representative's facets flickered in harmonic dissent, but no one acknowledged it yet. On the projection, the damaged vessel continued to turn, and the waveform continued to pulse. Archivist Letharin of the Historical Synthesis Division activated a secondary display. His crest was pale, the Karth equivalent of hesitation, but his voice remained steady. Context submission requested before threat classification. Velis inclined one limb. Proceed. The chamber darkened slightly as archival combat footage replaced the live image. Human infantry units moved through the ruins of a colony city. Energy weapons flashed. Explosions tore through structures. And over the open battlefield channel, unsecured, unfiltered, impossibly vulnerable, sound poured through the recording. Music. Voices shouting encouragement. Someone laughing. The chamber's environmental controls cycled rapidly as multiple species released involuntary alarm pheromones. Velus's limbs tightened against its frame. Human operational doctrine, Letherin continued, demonstrates repeated deviation from coalition communication standards. New footage appeared. A human pilot transmitting personal messages during atmospheric combat. A ground unit broadcasting a recorded family greeting while under siege. A final recording from the fall of their colony world. Multiple voices singing together while defensive positions collapsed. Silence settled heavily over the chamber. Not the enforced silence of doctrine. The silence of something else entirely. Letherin waited 3 full seconds before speaking again. Coalition standard mandates communication minimalism. Transmit only essential tactical data. Emotional expression is classified as operational interference. Individual identity markers are suppressed to maintain unit cohesion and reduce enemy exploitation. The next display showed the opposing model. Vrax communications, encrypted, efficient, silent between bursts. Coalition communications, compressed data packets, no voice unless command override. Then the human waveform returned. Expanded, layered, months of recordings. Analysis of the Vera signal, Letherin said, indicates cumulative audio content from multiple individuals across extended operational duration. The chamber brightened slightly as text annotations appeared. Personal messages, stories, humor segments, music files, recurring closing phrase. If you hear this, you're not alone. A Hellori delegate pulsed, a sound that translated roughly to unease. This level of identity exposure would compromise any known species' command integrity. Correct, Letherin replied. And yet, he paused, consulting his data. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Temporal analysis indicates new material has been added within the last 6 standard cycles. The chamber stilled. Someone was still there. Still recording. Still transmitting. Strategic analyst Vorel of the Sorin fleet stepped forward into the central light field. Operational assumptions must remain conservative, she said. Possibility 1. Automated distress loop from derelict vessel. Possibility 2. Deliberate lure. Possibility 3. Human psychological instability producing non-strategic behavior. Define instability, asked Velus. Vorel gestured toward the waveform. Continuous broad-spectrum transmission in an active war zone increases detection probability by 312%. Power allocation to non-essential output during damage conditions indicates compromised decision hierarchy. A crystalline representative from the Drawl combined emitted a harmonic countertone, soft at first, then resonant. Alternate interpretation, behavior is intentional. Several stations shifted. The Drawl rarely spoke in tactical debates. Explain, Velus said. The Drawl projection brightened, its facets catching the chamber light. Historical human combat records show increased performance under conditions of shared emotional signaling. Group identity reinforcement correlates with extended resistance beyond predicted collapse thresholds. This is documented. This is consistent. Vorel responded immediately. That effect is internal. External broadcasting provides no tactical advantage. The drawl tone deepened, something between insistence and weariness. Unless the purpose is not concealment. Silence returned. Because coalition doctrine assumed one principle above all others. Survival required not being found. The drawl continued. Humans may be attempting the inverse. Increasing detection probability to attract allies. General Terex's mandibles snapped once. Reckless. Inefficient. Illogical. The drawl's facets flared. Consistent. Velus raised a limb. We will proceed to classification vote. The chamber lights shifted to decision spectrum. Each delegation's interface illuminated. Motion 1, Velus announced. Human vessel classified as derelict automated transmission. No engagement. A wave of color passed through the chamber as votes registered. Hitai, watching from his station on the Radiant Accord via secure feed, saw the numbers climb. His fronds tightened. Result: 9 in favor. 18 opposed. Motion 2. Vessel classified as probable hostile lure. Engagement at range only. Voting again. Faster this time. Some delegations hesitated before committing. Result: 12 in favor. 15 opposed. A faint tension spread through the environmental field. The remaining option carried risk, significant risk. Vela spoke carefully. Motion 3. Vessel classified as active human asset. Close investigation authorized. Before the vote could begin, Archivist Leth Aaron requested the floor. Additional data, the archivist said quietly. The audio returned to the chamber. Not music this time. A human voice. Tired. Calm. The kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of holding on. If you're hearing this, then either you found us, or you're stuck out here too. A pause. Breathing. In the chamber, no one moved. Either way, you're not alone. The recording ended. For several seconds, the silence held. Then the voting field activated. Colors spread across the chamber, hesitant in some sectors, immediate in others. The Thren delegate voted before the audio finished. The Hellori waited until the last possible moment. The Draal's color flared bright and held. Velis watched the tally rise. Motion 3, approved. 19-8. The moderator lowered its limbs slowly. Operational directive. Coalition fleet will approach under defensive posture. Boarding authorization pending life sign confirmation. Across the chamber, the human waveform continued its slow, steady pulse. The coalition had built its survival on silence. Efficiency. Emotional absence. But out there, in the wreckage of a dead system, a damaged ship was doing the opposite. It was speaking, and against every instinct the galaxy possessed. The coalition had just decided to answer. The waveform spiked again. On the tactical display of the Radiant Accord, the human vessel's transmission band widened, spilling across additional frequencies like a flare burning through vacuum. Lieutenant Kitai leaned forward, fronds tightening as the power graph climbed against all probability. That output exceeds reactor reserve estimates, he said. Primary systems remain offline. They are rerouting manually. The projection magnified the drifting ship. External antenna arrays glowed faintly with thermal buildup, heat bleeding into space in thin, ghost-like plumes. Internal power signatures flickered, life support minimal, propulsion dead, weapons non-existent. And yet the broadcast strength increased another 12%. Kitai's mind supplied the translation automatically. They are burning their own survival margin to keep talking. Admiral Soren's voice was quiet. They are sacrificing internal systems. For transmission. Across the chamber, a secondary alert tone cut through the silence. Sharper than the first, urgent. Long-range threat sensors lit up. Red vectors appeared at the outer edge of the system. 3, then 5, then 9 gravitational disturbances bending local space. Kitai's fronds went rigid. Vrak's signatures confirmed. Multiple fleet elements altering course toward Vera. The Admiral's crest darkened, not just to threat coloration, but beyond it, into something Kitai had rarely seen. Estimated arrival. First elements, 12 standard hours. Additional groups following convergent trajectories. The human signal pulsed again across the display. They weren't the only ones who could hear it. On the Santa Lucia, Elena felt the vibration before the alarm sounded. A deep, resonant shudder that traveled through the deck plates and up into her bones. She'd felt it before, during the battle, when Vrak's ships translated into real space too close. The gravity wake of arriving vessels. She pulled up the tactical display. Red icons. Multiple. Closing. They heard us, she whispered. The broadcast timer ticked down. Power reserves dropped another fraction. She looked at the reactor readout. Core temperature climbing. Containment stress increasing. Then she looked at the signal strength. Still holding. She reached forward and increased transmission gain by another 2%. The reactor warning shifted from yellow to red. Elena ignored it. If the fight's coming, she said to the empty bridge, then everyone needs to know where it is. Boarding Commander Vesh watched the alert cascade across his helmet display as his strike shuttle cleared the Accord's launch bay. The small craft shuddered as maneuvering thrusters adjusted for intercept. Outside the forward viewport, the Coalition Armada spread across the stars in layered defense geometry, hundreds of vessels repositioning with precise, silent coordination. Beautiful, in its way. Efficient. Inside the shuttle, his boarding team sat locked into crash frames, armor sealed, weapons maglocked, but powered. No one spoke. Their species did not waste breath before uncertain engagements. Vesh studied the target data. Human vessel, structural integrity 38%. Atmosphere unstable. Radiation leakage moderate. Estimated crew unknown. Transmission strength increasing. That last datum troubled him. Increasing. While Vrak's forces converged. While reactor margins collapsed. This was not survival behavior. This was something else. Command update. The pilot transmitted. Vrak's convergence confirmed. We are now priority intercept. Vesh acknowledged with a sharp motion of his crest. Objective. The pilot continued. Secure vessel and terminate broadcast if necessary. If necessary. That phrase carried weight he didn't fully understand yet. The shuttle's sensors swept the drifting ship as they closed. The hull damage was worse up close. Scoring patterns from heavy energy fire. Patchwork repairs that looked almost improvisational. Exposed structural ribs where armor had been peeled away. One antenna array had been reinforced with external cabling. The work crude but functional. Human hands had done this. Recently. Manual modification confirmed, the pilot said. They want the signal strong. Vesh studied the power distribution overlay on his helmet display. Non-essential systems had been stripped entirely. Secondary life support was running at survival minimums, barely enough to keep a single organism alive. Environmental control fluctuated wildly. Broadcast allocation, 42% of total available power. 42%. While Vrak's ships closed. While the reactor cooked itself toward failure. One of his team spoke quietly. They prioritized transmission over survival. Vesh did not respond. He was still trying to understand. Inside the command deck of the Radiant Accord, tension thickened as new projections filled the space. Additional Vrak's groups detected, HFY reported. His voice stayed level, but his fronds betrayed him, twitching with each new contact. Total converging elements, now 14. The vectors formed a tightening web around the system, each red icon oriented toward the same coordinates. They are not coordinating through central command, a strategist noted, confusion bleeding into his tone. Independent groups, responding to the same signal source. Admiral Soren stared at the pulsing waveform. They are being summoned, she said. Not a question. Another officer spoke carefully. Recommendation, immediate signal suppression. Remote disruption if boarding fails. HFY hesitated before adding the final variable. Life sign scan indicates at least one survivor aboard. The chamber went still. On the projection, the human ship rotated slowly, antennas glowing, signal steady. Strategically, the answer was simple. The broadcast was drawing enemy forces. Every minute it continued increased the scale of the coming engagement. Operational doctrine was clear. Silence increased survival. But someone was still alive on that ship. Still choosing to transmit. Soren's voice was quiet. Boarding team status? 5 minutes to contact. Then we give them 5 minutes, she said. On the Santa Lucia, Elena felt the shuttle dock. The impact traveled through the hull like a heartbeat. She didn't move toward the airlock. Instead, she checked the broadcast one last time. Signal strength, optimal. Power reserves, 14%. Projected survival, unknown. She keyed the mic. If you're hearing this, she said, the cavalry's here. About damn time. She added the recording to the queue. Then she turned to face the boarding team. Behind her, the music played on. And on the tactical display, the first new friendly signatures began to appear at extreme range. On the other side of the outer airlock, boarding commander Vesh braced as the cutting tool burned through the manual hatch seam. Atmosphere trace detected, his scanner reported. Low pressure. Elevated carbon content. Thermal signatures. 1 active life form. 1. The inner hatch finally released with a metallic crack that echoed through the corridor beyond. The boarding team moved inside, weapons raised out of protocol more than expectation. Vesh had led hundreds of boardings. He knew what derelicts looked like. He knew what traps looked like. This was neither. The first thing that hit them was the sound. Music. Not broadcast translation through helmet speakers. Actual sound. Echoing faintly through the damaged corridors. Percussion and melody and something that might have been voices, distorted by distance and hull metal. The second thing was the smell, heated insulation, burned lubricants, organic atmosphere that had been recycled too many times. The scent of something holding on. The third thing was the walls. Every exposed panel was open. Cables ran externally along corridors, tied down with tape and brackets that didn't match any original design. Power distribution nodes had handwritten labels in multiple colors. Life support. Do not touch nav power loop. Temp broadcast. Priority. One section had a hand-drawn arrow and the words, "Yes, this looks wrong. Leave it." The team advanced slowly, magnetic boots clicking against deck plates that had been walked thin by months of use. "This vessel should not be operational," one of them said. Vesh agreed. Nothing about the system's configuration matched any known military standard. Efficiency had been abandoned. Redundancy ignored. Safety protocols overridden. Emergency venting systems had been cannibalized for parts. Fire suppression lines rerouted to cool broadcast amplifiers. Everything had been sacrificed for continuity. For connection, they reached the bridge. The door was open. Inside, a single human stood at the main console, one hand resting on the power controls, the other holding a portable diagnostic unit that sparked faintly with each reading. She looked exhausted, pale, a burn mark across one sleeve where she'd touched something too hot, dark circles under eyes that had stopped tracking days properly. But when she saw them, she straightened. "About time," Captain Elena Marquez said. Behind her, the broadcast timer hit 0. Her voice filled the room a second later as the rotation looped. "This is the Santa Lucia. Systems damaged, crew reduced, but operational." Vesh's team froze as the meaning registered. She had recorded that. For anyone. For everyone. The next file began. Music rose again. Vesh lowered his weapon slowly. "You understand," he said through the translator. "Your transmission has drawn enemy forces." Elena nodded. "Yes," she said simply. Another alarm tone sounded on the bridge. Power reserves dropping again. Reactor temperature climbing another notch. "You are reducing your survival probability," Vesh continued. She looked at the tactical display, where new friendly signatures were beginning to appear at long range, blue icons multiplying at the system's edge. Then she looked back at him. "If I go quiet," she said, "the Vraks take this system without a fight." The music swelled behind her. "If I stay loud," she continued, "nobody takes it alone." Vesh stared at the improvised wiring, the handwritten notes, the burned-out systems kept alive through manual effort and sheer refusal to stop. This wasn't inefficiency. This was a decision. Visibility over safety. Signal over survival. Defiance turned into strategy. For the first time since entering the ship, the coalition commander understood what the humans had been doing. They weren't trying to survive. They were making sure the battle would come. The first Vrak ships arrived 3 hours earlier than the most aggressive projection. On the tactical display aboard the Radiant Accord, space folded open along the outer gravity well and sharp-edged silhouettes spilled into real space. Long, angular hulls arranged in hunter formations, drives still glowing from forced transition. Lieutenant Kitai's fronds snapped tight against his back. Contact confirmed. 8 Vraks warships. Additional transition signatures forming. Admiral Soren didn't move. They accelerated their approach. "Yes, Admiral." Their vectors indicate high-priority convergence. Across the display, the human signal pulsed at the center of the system like a beacon. And the enemy had come running. Fleet readiness? Defensive formations incomplete. Several carrier groups still repositioning. The Vrak ships wasted no time. Their formation tightened, drives flaring again as they burned inward toward the broadcast source. Toward the Santa Lucia. "All units," Soren said calmly, "advance to intercept. We hold them away from the signal source." The order moved through the fleet. Coalition vessels shifted from cautious observation into full combat acceleration. Weapon capacitors surged. Shield harmonics climbed to maximum. The battle had begun earlier than anyone planned. Because the signal had worked too well. Inside the damaged human ship, the bridge lights flickered hard enough to momentarily plunge everything into darkness. Elena caught herself on the console as the reactor alarm shifted from warning to critical. "Engineering status," she called, already knowing there was no one left to answer. She pulled up the power distribution. Reactor output fluctuating. Thermal limits exceeded. Emergency venting unavailable. Those systems had been cannibalized to keep the broadcast amplifiers alive. External scan feeds showed the reason immediately. Red signatures. Multiple. Closing fast. "They're early," she whispered. The broadcast timer ticked down. Power reserves dropped another percentage. She hesitated for half a second. Then she increased the transmission gain again. If the fight was happening now, the signal needed to be stronger. On the boarding team's emergency command channel, Commander Vesh stared at the power spike in disbelief. "Captain Marquez," he transmitted, voice tight, "your reactor is exceeding safe limits. You must reduce broadcast output immediately." "No," she replied. The answer came without hesitation. "Your vessel will fail," Vesh said. "If the signal weakens now, incoming coalition elements might miss the system," she answered. "We're already committed." The first misunderstanding settled between them. To Vesh, survival probability was the primary objective. To her, the signal was the mission. Another warning alarm sounded as coalition fighters launched past the viewport outside, streaking toward the incoming Vrax formation. The battle was moving closer. On the Radiant Accord, the tactical situation degraded rapidly. "Enemy targeting solution forming," Hitai reported. "Primary objective appears to be the human vessel. They intend to silence the beacon," a strategist said. "Or capture it," another added. Admiral Soren studied the power telemetry streaming from the Santa Lucia. "Why is their output increasing?" she asked. "They are amplifying the broadcast," Hitai said. The chamber fell silent. "That is not a defensive response," one officer said carefully. Second misunderstanding. To the coalition, increasing emissions during combat was equivalent to broadcasting one's position to the enemy. To the human, that was exactly the point. "Open channel," Soren ordered. The connection resolved with static. "Captain Marquez," she said, voice controlled. "Coalition Command advises immediate broadcast termination. Your signal is drawing additional hostile elements and placing fleet operations at risk." There was a pause on the other end. Background noise, alarms, distant impacts, the steady pulse of music. Then the human spoke. "If the signal stops," Marquez said, "the system goes dark." Soren's crest tightened. "You are increasing enemy concentration," she replied. "And friendly concentration," Marquez said. Third misunderstanding. Coalition doctrine assumed centralized coordination. Human strategy assumed anyone listening would come. Another explosion lit the tactical display as the first coalition cruiser exchanged fire with the Vrax advanced ships. Casualty projections began updating. The numbers climbed. On the Santa Lucia, the deck lurched as distant weapons fire shook nearby space. Reactor temperature climbed again. Warning lights filled the bridge. Commander Vesh stepped forward, abandoning protocol distance. "Captain," he said, voice low but urgent, "your actions may result in additional coalition losses." Elena looked at the tactical overlay showing more blue signatures appearing at extreme range, small, scattered groups responding to the broadcast. "They're coming," she said. "They may arrive too late," Vesh replied. Fourth misunderstanding. The coalition measured success by immediate tactical balance. Elena was thinking in waves. On the flagship, Admiral Soren watched the casualty counter tick upward as the early engagement intensified. Enemy numbers, increasing. Friendly reinforcements, inbound, but distant. And at the center of it all, the human ship continued to burn precious power, pushing its signal into space. "She is prioritizing future reinforcement over current survivability," a strategist said. "At the cost of present fleet stability," another added. Soren did not respond immediately, because the data showed something else. Every new coalition contact entering long-range detection was approaching at maximum speed. Without orders, without coordination, just following the signal. "Continue engagement," she said at last. But her crest remained dark with concern. Inside the doctrine channel, her private advisory council spoke quietly. "If the human reactor fails," one said, "the broadcast stops anyway. If additional Vrax groups arrive before reinforcement waves, we face numerical collapse. This strategy may trigger a larger battle than we can sustain." The numbers supported all of it. Good intentions, worsening conditions, a plan that might succeed later, and get them destroyed now. On the Santa Lucia, Elena recorded another message and inserted it into the rotation. "This is Captain Marquez. Multiple hostile contacts in system. Coalition forces engaged. We are maintaining signal strength." She hesitated, listening to the distant thunder of weapons through the hull. "If you're out there," she added quietly, "we could use you now." She ended the recording and leaned back as the reactor warning shifted from red to flashing white. Core stability margin, 6%. Estimated failure, less than 2 hours. The music swelled again through the ship. Commander Vesh watched her, then opened a priority channel to the Radiant Accord. "Boarding commander report," he said. "Human captain refuses broadcast termination despite reactor instability and fleet risk." There was a pause before Admiral Soren answered. "Assessment." Vesh looked at the improvised wiring, the handwritten power notes, the human standing at her console with absolute certainty despite the alarms. "She believes the signal is the battle," he said. Another pause. Then, quietly, "And if she is wrong?" Outside the system, new Vrax transition signatures began forming. The reactor alarm on the Santa Lucia stopped changing tones. It had reached the final one. A steady, flat pulse that meant there were no more safety margins left to calculate. Core stability, 2%. Estimated failure, 12 minutes. Elena barely glanced at it. Outside the forward viewport, the battle had spread across the system like a storm. Coalition cruisers burned hard toward the inner engagement zone, their drives carving bright scars across the dark. Vrax ships answered with precise, cutting volleys, their formations tightening as more enemy signatures dropped into real space along converging vectors. "They're reinforcing faster than we are," Commander Vesh said quietly, watching the tactical overlay. Red icons multiplied. Blue icons disappeared. One coalition destroyer winked out entirely as a Vrax lance strike tore through its reactor. Another drifted, engines dead, venting atmosphere in a long white plume. On the flagship, Lieutenant Kitai's voice carried tight urgency. Enemy numerical advantage now 1.8 to 1. Additional hostile transitions detected. The projections shifted again. More Vrax. They were coming to the signal. The irony tightened the air in the command chamber. The beacon meant to summon help was feeding the enemy as well. "Admiral," a strategist said carefully, "if this trend continues, fleet collapse probability exceeds 40% within the hour." Admiral Soren didn't respond immediately, because at the center of the tactical display, the human ship still pulsed, still broadcasting, and now it was dying. On the Santa Lucia, the lights dimmed as non-essential systems shut down automatically. Even the music dropped in volume, the amplifiers struggling to maintain output as power diverted to keep the reactor from tearing itself apart. Elena keyed the mic one more time. "This is Captain Marquez," she said, voice steady despite the tremor running through the deck. "Reactor failure imminent. Broadcast will continue until loss of power." She hesitated. Coalition forces engaged. Enemy strength increasing. "If you're still out there." The deck lurched hard as distant weapons fire rippled through the local gravity field. Now would be a good time. She released the key. Power reserves dropped another fraction. 9 minutes. On the Radiant Accord, Kitai's sensors screamed. "New transition signatures," he shouted. "Multiple, outer system perimeter." The tactical display flared white as space folded open along the far gravity horizon. One ship emerged. Then 3. Then dozens. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Identification codes began resolving. Coalition. Independent patrol groups. Long-range survey flotillas. Civilian defense carriers. Units from sectors that had received no official call to arms. "They're coming in without coordination," Kitai said, disbelief bleeding through his composure. "No centralized command routing. No staging. They're arriving directly on signal vector." Another wave dropped out of faster than light. Then another. The system map filled with blue. Admiral Soren leaned forward as numbers recalculated in real time. Enemy strength, steady. Friendly strength, rising. And still rising. The incoming ships didn't wait for orders. They accelerated immediately toward the engagement zone, slipping into gaps in the coalition line, reinforcing weak sectors, targeting exposed Vrax flanks. Weeks of signal travel time had turned into simultaneous arrival. The first of the new formations hit the Vrax outer screen hard, breaking their advance momentum. A heavy carrier group from the Rim Protectorate dropped fighters directly into the enemy's rear vector. A patrol fleet from the Hellori Collective arrived at maximum burn and fired before their drives had even cooled. For the first time since the battle began, the red icons stopped multiplying. Then they started disappearing. On the Santa Lucia, the tactical display updated. More blue, then more, then a flood of them. Elena stared. "They heard us," she whispered. 6 minutes. On the flagship, Kitai's voice carried a new tone. Friendly numerical advantage achieved. Enemy formations destabilizing. Multiple Vrax groups attempting disengagement. The tactical overlay showed the shift clearly. What had been a tightening noose around the center of the system was now fracturing as coalition reinforcements struck from multiple directions at once. The Vrax had come expecting to isolate a single damaged signal source. Instead, they had flown into a gathering point, a trap they hadn't recognized until it closed. Admiral Soren watched the pattern emerge, not planned, not coordinated through command hierarchy, but converging naturally around the beacon at the system's heart. No staging delays. No communication bottlenecks. No waiting for orders. Just ships arriving, seeing the fight, and joining it. Enemy retreat confirmed, Kitai said. On the display, Vrax formations broke cleanly and began emergency transition maneuvers. Several ships failed to escape before coalition fire caught them. Others vanished into faster-than-light in scattered directions. The system fell quiet again, this time filled with the drifting glow of hundreds of friendly vessels. On the Santa Lucia, the reactor warning dropped to a new message. Core stabilizing. External power link established. Elena blinked. Commander Vesh checked his scanner, then looked up at her. Multiple coalition vessels are transmitting remote support power through tether relays, he said. The broadcast timer reset to full. The music surged back to full strength. Elena leaned back in her chair and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. On the flagship, Admiral Soren stared at the system map, now crowded with ships from sectors that had not even been notified of the engagement. They came without orders, one of her strategists said. They came because they heard the signal, Kitai added. Soren looked at the pulsing waveform. For the coalition, unity had always been built through structure. Councils, protocols, chain of command, coordination delays measured in days or weeks. The human had bypassed all of it. Maximum visibility. Maximum reach. Anyone who heard the signal came. No authorization required. No hesitation. She understood now. The broadcast had never been reckless. It had been faster than command. Stronger than protocol. At the center of the system, the damaged human ship continued to sing. And for the first time, surrounded by hundreds of responding vessels, Admiral Soren allowed her crest to lift slightly. One small ship. One voice. And the entire galaxy had answered. The battle ended quietly, not with a final explosion or a decisive moment, but with the slow fading of weapons fire and the steady appearance of status confirmations across the system. Vrax signatures, gone. Coalition vessels, damaged, scattered, holding position. Rescue operations began immediately. Around the Vera debris field, recovery craft moved from ship to ship, collecting escape pods, stabilizing breached hulls, sealing compartments that still held atmosphere. Casualty reports climbed in careful increments. Some ships answered. Some did not. At the center of it all, the Santa Lucia finally began to die. External power relays had stabilized the broadcast and prevented immediate reactor collapse, but the core had suffered irreversible thermal distortion. Internal alarms cycled through cascading failures as containment tolerances slipped further outside safe limits. Reactor breach probability rising, a coalition engineer reported. We cannot maintain remote stabilization much longer. Inside the human ship, the lights flickered again, this time slower, heavier, as if the vessel itself were running out of strength. Commander Vesh stood near the bridge hatch as evacuation teams moved in. Captain Marquez resisted for exactly 12 seconds. We still have signal integrity, she said, glancing at the broadcast console. You have 3 minutes before core venting, Vesh replied. She hesitated. Then she reached forward and added one last file to the rotation. This is the Santa Lucia, she recorded. System secured. Coalition forces present. If you're still traveling toward this signal, you can stand down. A small breath. And, thanks for coming. She shut down the internal transmitter. 2 minutes later, the last human left the ship. 30 seconds after that, the reactor containment failed. From a safe distance, the coalition watched the damaged vessel bloom briefly with light as emergency venting tore through the weakened core structure. The hull did not explode. It simply went dark, systems finally exhausted. But the external antenna array remained intact. And the signal, now routed through coalition relays, continued. In the command chamber of the Radiant Accord, the archive playback filled the room. Hours became days. Days became weeks. Coalition analysts had expected tactical data, automated logs, perhaps a few emergency transmissions. Instead, they found a life. The waveform display stretched across the wall, thousands of hours of recorded content indexed and categorized. Music playlists arranged by crew preference. Engineering lectures about improvised repairs. Personal messages to families who might never receive them. Shared meals recorded for morale. Arguments. Laughter. Quiet conversations late in the cycle when exhaustion lowered voices. Stress markers within the crew's biometric logs told the technical story. During silent periods early in the isolation phase, cognitive performance declined. Reaction time slowed. Error rates increased. After continuous audio rotation began, stress hormones dropped. Sleep cycles stabilized. Task completion improved despite worsening physical conditions. Emotional continuity functioned as a psychological stabilizer, the medical analyst reported, equivalent to a distributed support network. Another clip played. Sullivan's voice again. If you're hearing this, you're not alone. The chamber remained silent long after the recording ended. Admiral Soren watched the data overlays, the correlation graphs, the power allocation decisions that had diverted life support margin into broadcast amplification. They chose connection over conservation, one strategist said, and remained operational far beyond predicted endurance, another added. On a separate display, the tactical timeline replayed the battle. Signal propagation paths mapped against arrival vectors. Independent fleets converging from multiple sectors. Arrival times matching lightspeed travel from broadcast origin. No command orders. No coordination delays. Just ships that had heard something and decided to come. Soren requested a direct meeting. Captain Elena Marquez stood in the medical recovery bay, a blanket draped over her shoulders, burned dressings visible along one arm. She looked smaller outside the command chair, exhaustion settling into her posture now that the urgency was gone. The admiral entered with only a single aide. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Soren inclined her crest slightly, a gesture rarely used outside formal commendation. Captain Marquez, she said, coalition analysis confirms your transmission caused significant operational disruption. Elena managed a tired smile. Yeah, that tracks. A pause. Your signal caused chaos, Soren continued. She gestured toward the observation port, where hundreds of coalition ships still filled the Vera system, recovery lights blinking across the darkness. And it saved us. Elena didn't answer immediately. Then she nodded once. Sometimes you don't need coordination, she said quietly. Sometimes you just need everyone to know where the fight is. In the days that followed, the changes began slowly. At first, it was only internal. A Hellori recovery team requested permission to maintain continuous audio contact between their scattered units. A Thren carrier allowed open crew channel communication during extended repair cycles. A drawl formation began transmitting harmonic patterns to maintain group synchronization. Then someone routed one of the human music files across a shared operations band. No one ordered it. No one objected. Soon, multiple fleets were transmitting low-level morale channels alongside tactical data, music, spoken updates, identity markers. Efficiency metrics dipped slightly. Psychological endurance rose significantly. In the Vera system, the wreck of the Santa Lucia was scheduled for standard salvage processing. The order was quietly changed. Instead of dismantling, engineering teams stabilized the remaining structure and reinforced the surviving antenna array. External power feeds were installed. A permanent relay buoy anchored the wreck in position. The ship would remain. A navigation marker appeared in coalition charts. Designation, Vera Signal Memorial. Active transmission, archival rotation. The music played. The messages repeated. And any ship passing through the system would hear, faint but unmistakable, the words that had pulled half the galaxy into a single battle. If you hear this, you're not alone. The change did not arrive with a ceremony. It appeared first as a line added to a fleet operations update. Directive 47A, Open Signal Protocol. During extended isolation, distributed engagements, or loss of command continuity, units are authorized to maintain low-band identity and morale transmissions alongside tactical traffic. At first, most captains ignored it. Silence was habit. Silence was safety. But the next time a patrol group found itself drifting on the edge of a damaged jump lane for 2 days without contact, someone opened a channel. A simple identifier. Then a status report. Then, after a long pause, a quiet piece of music routed at minimal power. No one ordered it shut down. Across the coalition, similar experiments began to appear in after-action logs. Mixed species crews reported lower stress indicators during long transits. Maintenance errors dropped. Sleep cycles stabilized during extended alert conditions. Not dramatic improvements. Just enough to notice. Not enough to feel like a revolution. Enough to keep. The Communications Academy added a new simulation module. Students were given a scenario: scattered forces, disrupted command network, unknown enemy movements. Traditional doctrine produced delayed responses and fragmented reinforcement. When open signal was enabled, independent units converged faster. Not perfectly, but faster. The doctrine manual did not change its core principle. Silence was still preferred, but silence was no longer absolute. Somewhere in the margins, the galaxy had made room for noise. The cultural changes came slower. At first, transmissions stayed strictly functional. Crew rosters spoken aloud at shift changes, identity confirmations that included individual names instead of unit codes. Then the Hellori Collective began sharing harmonic calibration tones across multi-ship formations, improving synchronization. A Thren carrier authorized recorded family greetings during long deployments. A Draal engineering fleet began exchanging structural resonance music while performing coordinated repairs. Human ships did what they had always done. They shared everything. The first mixed species joint exercise under open signal caused confusion when a human destroyer broadcast a rotating music playlist during a simulated engagement. The Thren commander filed a formal efficiency complaint. 3 cycles later, the same commander quietly requested a copy of the rotation for crew endurance testing. Not all reactions were positive. Some species reported overstimulation during prolonged exposure. Others restricted transmissions to tightly controlled bands. But the change spread anyway, not through policy enforcement, but through adoption. Because crews that talked lasted longer. Because ships that heard each other stopped feeling alone. Far from coalition space, the Vraks did not understand what was happening. Interception logs showed a growing pattern. Enemy fleets operating on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Identity markers. Non-tactical audio. Unencrypted morale signals embedded between data bursts. At first, Vraks intelligence classified it as inefficiency. Then they noticed something else. Enemy response times were improving without corresponding command traffic. Independent units were arriving at conflict zones faster than projected. Retreating coalition groups were reforming instead of scattering. Interrogation of captured data produced no central coordination source. Just overlapping signals. Presence. Noise. Connection. A Vraks intelligence report summarized the phenomenon in clinical terms. Adversary cohesion increasing in proportion to communication density. Recommendation: disrupt morale band transmissions where possible. The recommendation proved difficult to implement. There were too many voices. Years later, at the Coalition Communications Academy, a lecture hall sat in near silence. Not enforced silence. Listening silence. On the central display, the waveform of the Vera signal pulsed steadily. Instructor Letherin, formerly the archivist who had first presented the human data, gestured toward it. Human signal theory is not about emotion, the instructor said. It is about visibility. The display shifted, showing fleet convergence timelines from the Battle of Vera. No command authority ordered those reinforcements, Letherin continued. The signal reduced decision time to 0. Units did not wait for instruction. They responded to presence. A student raised a limb. Is this strategy efficient? Letherin paused. No, the instructor said. It is resilient. The waveform pulsed again. Efficiency assumes perfect coordination. Resilience assumes failure and compensates for it. The next slide appeared. A single damaged ship. Still broadcasting. Humans did not defeat the Vraks at Vera, Letherin said quietly. They removed the delay between knowing and acting. The class sat in silence for a long moment. Then the playback began. Music. A tired voice. If you hear this, you're not alone. On the far frontier, months beyond the nearest established relay network, a new ship cleared its construction dock. The hull was smaller than a warship, larger than a scout. long-range exploration configuration, reinforced communications array, extended endurance systems. Paint along the forward section identified it simply. HCS Pathfinder. Inside the communications bay, a young human officer ran through the final pre-launch checklist. Primary antenna. Operational. Long-range broadcast array. Operational. Open signal authorization. The officer hesitated for only a second. Enabled. The ship cleared the dock and rotated toward the dark between stars. There were no guarantees out there. No certainty of allies. No certainty of anything. The officer keyed the transmitter before the jump. The message went out on low power, wideband, simple and clear. "This is humanity," she said. The engines began to build. "If you hear us." The stars stretched into lines. "You're not alone." The ship vanished into faster than light. And somewhere, far ahead in the dark, the signal kept traveling.